You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Roisin Ni Chleirigh. I'm flying solo again today. Paul is off on his day job. My guest for this video is Councillor Eimear Tobin. Eimear Tobin represents Meath West in the Navan LEA of County Meath Council. Eimear was first elected to the Meath Council in 2019 for Aontú at the launch of the new Aontú political party here in Ireland. In 2024 local elections, Eimear Tobin was elected with an amazing 1,588 first preference votes. Councillor Eimear Tobin, you're very, very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup.
Hi, Roisin. Eimear Tobin is my name, and I'm a county councillor with Aontú for the area of Navan. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and talk about what I do as a councillor, what I do within the party of Aontú, and how proud I am about what we're trying to do and make this country a lot better for people who are suffering. So just to let you know, I'm a councillor about 6 years, and it's been a very sharp learning curve doing this particular job because, you know, everybody has this impression that as a councillor, you're helping people with all the usual stuff like medical cards and, you know, social welfare issues, and housing obviously is a huge part, but there are 1,000,001 other things as well, because the range of issues that councillors help the public with is extending with each passing year. And then there's a lot of work that one has to do with the council, that Meath County Council in my case. So, you know, I had 2 meetings there this morning. We would have a full council meeting once a month. We'd have a Navan Town Council once a month. And then there'd be 5 or 6 other meetings that you would need to go to those offices to contribute to whatever discussion is taking place. So it is phenomenally busy. And from day one, I decided to do this role full time because as I mentioned, the range of issues that you're helping people with means that it is very hard to cover those, you know, issues properly if you're only doing 20 hours a week. So I'm delighted that I'm able to do it full time. And if I had an extra 10 hours a day, I could easily fill those 10 hours as well, because it is, you know, I think a lot of people are suffering and they are coming to us far more than they did 10 years ago. So in order to really run something to the nth degree and try and get satisfaction for constituents, you have to put in the hours. And as many people know, it is harder to get through to county councils these days. It is harder to get through to departments these days. I myself have great difficulty in trying to get answers from various public services agencies or departments. It is really, really difficult. They want everybody to go to email. And unfortunately, when we use email, sometimes we just get these default responses that give no specific answer to the question you have. So it just makes the job somewhat frustrating and harder then to get solutions for constituents. But, you know, it is a great job. It is great to be able to help people. I was very lucky. I was able to go to college after school. We discussed a lot of social issues in our house. We were always encouraged to think for ourselves. We didn't always agree with our parents. Sometimes we did. But we're always taught to think for ourselves and have our own opinions and not always go with the flow. So that certainly enabled me as a councillor to be able to pass on the information that I have, or my ability to be able to navigate all the different, you know, agencies out there. And it is lovely to be able to give that to people who you know, mightn't have had the same opportunities in life that I've had.
And, you know, you are also, tell our viewers and our listeners, you're also the sister of the founder of Aontú, Peadar Toibin.
That is correct. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, because I often get known as, are you Peadar Tobin's sister? But no, I am very, very proud of Peadar. He has been interested in politics since primary school. I'm a couple of years older than Peadar. We're the youngest 2 in our family. So we were always close growing up, and I was always acutely aware that he loved reading political tomes in primary school from a young age. So this interest he always had in a united Ireland, in representing the marginalised, it's always been there for day one. So I could always see this incredibly genuine streak in him where he really wanted to help people. And, you know, he's not as motivated as some politicians are by the mercs and perks. He's incredibly vested in helping his community. And like, it is great. We both grew up in the centre of Navan town. You know, it is a great community. It's gotten very, very big in the last decade and a half. But we still know an awful lot of people. We're a large family, so lots of people know us and trust us, and we're very delighted and honoured that they continue to place their trust in us. And by that token, we're more than happy to keep on helping as many people as possible.
And Councillor Tobin, you topped the poll and was elected on the first count with an amazing 1,588 votes.
Yeah, no, well, look, I didn't have the poll. I came second, which was pretty good because I don't actually live in that MD. I live just outside it, and it's a little bit of a pity because I've helped everyone in my neighbourhood, so those votes couldn't come my way because obviously that's in a different municipal district. But look, I was very, very happy with the vote. I did put in a very, very busy 5 years. As I said, I worked as a full-time councillor, so it was lovely to kind of get reciprocation or some, appreciation of what I'm doing, and it kind of strengthens my resolve to keep doing it and doing it better.
Councillor Tobin, Aontú is a relatively new, it's not new now, but it's still relatively new political party. It was founded in 2019 by your brother Cllr Tobin, and you've been the county councillor for Aontú since 2019.
That's correct, Roisin. So when Peadar was talking about, setting up a new party, we were right there beside him because, there's so many people you talk to or you hear their comments on social media where they say they're politically homeless. And this isn't a recent phenomenon. This has been going on for years. So there is a huge appetite for a new political party for some years. And, as I mentioned to you before about Peadar, he's incredibly genuine and he's incredibly motivated to help those that just haven't had the same opportunities as ourselves. We're all, the type of people that call a spade a spade. We're not those type of people who talks a lot but says nothing. If you ask us a question, we'll give you a direct answer. It mightn't always be the answer you want, but we are incredibly, motivated to be truthful and to be honest, because there's enough politicians out there that, dance around issues and just won't, pin their flag to the mast. And we're a political party that does, and we stand for something, and that is something that is becoming more and more rare amongst politicians. There seems to be this, recent kind of trajectory where politicians just do what their leader tells them, and they don't seem to think for themselves. And the reason they join politics nearly becomes harder to define, because once they're in, they don't seem to follow through on the promises they made to the electorate. And, this is a tough job, and there's plenty of other jobs I could have taken on that pay far better than what a councillor gets paid, and far easier, and I'd have my evenings back and I'd have my weekends back. But I feel so strongly about the good that we're trying to do, and in some part achieving, that it I have no doubt about the objectives of our party in the goodness that they will bring to people's lives. And the challenge that faces us is to convey that message to the greater, wider public, because some people don't like our stance on the right to life issue, and I respect that, despite my disagreeing with their viewpoint. And sometimes they can be quick to dismiss us because they think, well, we don't agree with Aontú on that issue, so therefore there's no merit to the rest of the things they stand for. And I would totally refute that, because as with each passing year, more and more people are learning that there is so much more to our party than the right to life issue, even though that is a core principle. But they know that we are here to help the marginalised and to hold the government to account, because in truth, there hasn't been a political party in this country for the last decade that has really done a stalwart and robust job on holding this government to account. And that is why in 2025 we are where we are, because the government feels there is no threat to their dominance. And why would they change tack if they can get away with what they're doing?
Yes, and an awful lot of people have been saying up until 2024, for the last 5 years, there was 4, 5, maybe 8, 6, 7 years, there was no real opposition. A lot of people say, I'm not saying it's the Irish Political Roundup's point of view, but a lot of people were saying that there was no real opposition in Dáil Éireann for since the last general election until 2024. Apart from Aontú, Peadar Tobin was some people say that Peadar Tobin was on his own as a TD of one of Aontú, there calling the government to account.
Exactly. And, it just shows if one man can achieve so much in holding a spotlight to the government's inaction or inertia or, sometimes making really foolish decisions, it just shows you that if, Aontú gets bigger, or when Aontú gets bigger, that we can achieve so much more. Because obviously Peadar was, as you said, the party was just one TD in Dáil Éireann, but he still managed to communicate all the shortfalls in government management over the last few years. And, it just takes one person to change things. But thankfully, we have a lot more elected reps now. We're growing, more people are hearing about us. And I have no doubt in a few years, we're going to have a few more TDs in there with himself and Paul Lawless.
And before we get into the nitty-gritty of your policies and campaigns, can you just sort of tell our viewers who may not be too aware of Aontú just how many county councillors you have elected? You have one elected, you have Peadar Tobin and Paul Lawless in Dáil Éireann. You have Senator Sarah O'Reilly in the Senate. Tell us about how many county councillors you have at the present.
So we have 8 county councillors, Wexford, Mayo, Meath, Limerick, 2 in Dublin, and I'm forgetting somebody. Yeah, so they're not scattered around the 4 corners yet. As I say, Roisin, we're heading that direction. But we did have another councillor or another candidate in Kildare where there had to be 4 recounts. She was a vote ahead of another candidate, and then she was deemed elected, and then he asked for a recount, and I think within 4 recounts, then he prevailed with, I think, 2 votes ahead. So that was incredibly close. And then I know down in Cork, there was another very, very close call, and another up in Derry, another very, very close. So we easily could have got another 5 or 6 councillors elected. They were just on the precipice. But no, look, that's very, very heartening. And, a lot of our local area reps, they're the people that hope to run in the next local election. They're all busy and activist on the ground and, building their profile, getting the confidence of the people in them. And hopefully that will all translate into more reps being elected at the next elections.
And you mentioned there you're an all-Ireland party. Aontú is an all-Ireland party.
Yes, as I mentioned to you earlier, Roisin, Peadar was reading books about Irish unity back in his primary school days. So Peadar was not going to found a party with his co-founders unless it had all Ireland unity. It's a huge core objective of the party, and we had a protest gathering outside the GPO last week, where we feel there is a distinct dilution of our heritage, history and culture by the current administration. There's been lots of very unfortunate utterances from Micheál Martin to this regard, and we will stand to the 11th hour to protect all that's important about our culture, history and heritage. So we had a really heartwarming protest gathering outside the GPO last week, and then we were down in Bodenstown for the Wolf Throne commemoration. So all these things just solidify or consolidate how we feel about our Irishness, about our history, about our all-Ireland approach that is critical to the betterment of this country and to the further development of Aontú.
And up north, you have Gemma Brawley, who is she the vice president of Aontú?
That's right, deputy leader based in Derry. She's a Gaeilgeoir, fluent teacher, fluent Irish speaker and teacher, and she does huge work. She leads one of the hospital campaigns in her area. She's very, very active on the ground. The poor child, the Donahue, you remember the Fiona O'Donoghue, her poor child that was missing and found dead in a storm drain. She's really done an awful lot of work to try and get the PSNI to be able to answer the poor mother's questions about that incredibly tragic story. And it's hard to believe that the family are no further on in finding out what happened, the poor boy. But so she's a great worker, and she's a really, really good speaker. And if you were to be in her company for more than 2 minutes, you would be struck by her genuine desire to really help people, and just to make, as I say, it sounds simple, but just to make Ireland a far better place for us all to live in, and to strengthen our community ties and get cohesion back into, like, when we talk about unity, Roisin, we don't just talk about unity north and south, we talk about unity within communities, because everybody benefits when there's cohesion and unity in their own community.
Would you say then that the communities around Ireland, in all our cities, our towns and villages, even the rural areas, have been fractured over the years?
Well, there is the element that as towns and cities get bigger, unity or cohesion will be somewhat diluted. Now, not eradicated or decimated, but just a little, people are a little bit more stick to themselves in the big cities, and there isn't the same kind of awareness of one's neighbours. But definitely, I would say in the last 2-3 years, cohesion has taken a huge knock, and that is primarily down to the incredibly bad mismanagement by this government of the entire immigration process, and the framing of immigration as a feature in our lives now. The government, I really believe, rather than grasping the nettle of people's reaction to immigration, I really think they are completely going down the wrong path and pitting one person against the next and labeling people for having certain opinions. And it's even just as recently as 3 or 4 days ago, I saw RTE post a Facebook post about anti-immigration groups are getting far more organised. And I just thought that is such a divisive thing to write, because it's not anti-immigration. It is anti-government management of immigration. That is the core problem at the heart of the eating away of cohesion in our communities. And I think the government could not be more reckless or more irresponsible by pursuing this narrative, because the Irish people are not a racist country. They really aren't. And this idea of saying that there is a certain cohort that is utterly damaging, and it'll have far-reaching ramifications into the future. This is about, the huge numbers coming in, the government's inability to differentiate between the legal immigrant and the illegal immigrant, or the government's inability to stop the huge numbers coming down from the north, because it's even more difficult to ascertain where those people come from. And then, Aontú has been front and to the fore of getting information about the number of deportation notices issued for the last 3 or 4 years. And the numbers issued are in the high thousands, and yet the numbers actioned is in the early hundreds. So there's no, the government's matching of resources to deal with this to the actual numbers come in is on the floor, and they're not dealing with it properly. And the longer it goes on, and the longer we have people abusing the asylum process, as long as that continues, it's going to lead to huge issues of division, and, as I said, people being pitted against each other. And obviously this all feeds into the housing scarcity, which obviously was well embedded before we have these immigration numbers over the last 2 or 3 years. The government wasn't able to deal with the housing issue a few years ago. Things were really, really bad. I was a councillor. I know from dealing with all the constituents trying to get on the housing list, it was bad before immigration levels took off, but it's nothing to what it is now. And I just do not see any plan from this government how they're going to deal with it, how they're going to reassure people that deportation notices will be actioned in a timely and efficient manner. And, only the other day I heard Simon Harris talk about how robust and fair our system is. It isn't fair and robust. We wouldn't have the number of people abusing the asylum seeking process if it was robust. So they say one thing, and yet the reality on the ground is entirely different.
And we're also, the Irish Political Roundup are hearing that people are saying, that there isn't the infrastructure. They're putting asylum seekers, mainly men, is what a lot of people's concerns who we're talking to when we're out and about. It is the influx of men. They're not bringing their families. They're not bringing their relatives with them. That is causing an awful lot of concern. And plus, and what we're hearing too is that the asylum seekers are being put into rural areas where there's nothing for them to do. There's no infrastructure or anything for them to actually get into town or do anything. There's an awful lot of concern from families, and are the government just refusing to listen to the concerns of local people?
There's no doubt that it's not even that they're refusing to listen. They are ignoring. They're not engaging. Any email you send in to the relevant office about what's happening in this particular area, that particular area with regard to the opening of an IPAS centre, you cannot get information. Absolutely cannot get information till after the fact. So, this has been said from day one. The refusal by the government to engage with local communities is a huge issue. That has not improved a whit since day one of the opening of IPAS centres around the country. Number two, you're correct. There are a greater proportion of a certain age group and a certain sex, and that is causing concern because nobody likes to see any large numbers of young men kind of holed up in some place in the middle of the country with nothing to do all day. There's the process of getting them checked for entitlement to stay takes not months, takes many years in many cases. So it is an awfully protracted situation. They don't have enough staff. They keep talking about they are resourcing it better. They're not resourcing it adequately. And the longer people have to wait, the more frustrated they become, the unhappier they become. And when we're all working really, really hard and, busy with our children and all of that, it is very difficult to see that there are huge cohorts of immigrants around the country, in situations which I know many of them aren't happy with. Many of them who are entitled and say would love to get out working, would love to contribute, and they'd be far better for it. And we would love to see that happening. And I just do not understand why the government is not resourcing it properly. It is feeding into all this kind of suspicion and doubt and fear and fear mongering, and that serves nobody. So we have appealed to the government to resource the whole immigration processing process properly, and it will set people's minds at rest. But what also needs to happen, there has to be a better system to notify anybody thinking of coming to Ireland that you do not come in unless you're from an unsafe country or that you fit this criteria, and that you will be turned away at the door if you do not fit the qualifying criteria. And I don't feel that has been done whatsoever. And we have called for a sea border. It is the only way to deal with the situation where we have lots of immigrants who are coming down to the north. And, you've heard our leadership say that 80% of those seeking asylum do not qualify. I wonder, is it even higher at this stage? So because there is a vacuum in terms of the information we're not getting, it makes a bad situation even worse. And I think the government has a duty to communicate clearly to the public, to reassure public, and to be seen to be far more robust in how it deals with all elements of immigration.
Because you mentioned there too, so I've got 2 points to come back to, and that was one, you mentioned that the people who do come in legally and through the proper channels of immigration, and they do resent. I'm talking to an awful lot of people, professionals and people who came, they had to pay, they had to apply, they had to go through the process of waiting and paying to actually for their visas and their application, and then come here and work, where they also feel aggrieved that that people in the immigration, they're coming over, they've been handed everything that people had to work for. No, I grew up, living in Africa and Saudi Arabia. We had to go through all the process for my father to work in Africa and Saudi Arabia, go through all the channels and visas, etc. And so they feel aggrieved, and they also feel aggrieved about the Garda vetting, because everybody has to go through Garda vetting. We have to go through Garda vetting for everything. But people are coming into the country and, the passports are going missing. How do they get into the country if they have no passports? And you don't know who they are. So there's no real Garda vetting process.
I know, and it is incredible, Roisin, when you list out all those things that are currently not happening. And, this isn't just something that started last week. This is going on for a number of years now. And the government doesn't seem to have grappled with that problem. And that is a very, very serious problem. I mean, that we're still talking now about people entering our country without documentation. It is utterly unacceptable. And really and truly, they shouldn't even be allowed to descend from the plane. If they got on the plane, they had it, and if they can't produce it on coming off the plane, they should be a very, very straightforward thing. But when Minister McEntee was in charge, her response was, "This is very complicated," and I do see a little improvement in Minister O'Callaghan, but it's not quick enough. They're not doing enough quick enough. And as I said, this is going on some years now, and it doesn't augur well for the level of concerns out in the greater community, because the rate at which improvement is happening is way too slow. And it's just unbelievable that I heard something about Micheál Martin appointed another few advisors last week. There's budget to appoint advisors, and yet there's a department that needs to be resourced properly with staff to literally treble their output in terms of work outcomes. But there doesn't seem to be an appetite. And I don't understand why the government is sitting on its hands in this regard, because this is the issue of our time. The housing, obviously, said, is completely interlinked. And we're never, ever going to get a grip on housing until this issue is far better handled. So I think, obviously the dollar is going into recess now next week, so it's going to be even harder than it already is to try and get answers. But I think the government needs to publish a plan come September. As in, they can work on it over the summer, but come September, the people of this country need a fully costed and detailed plan as to how the government is dealing with every element of the immigration management. Because, frankly, we're all running out of patience. There's far too many people suffering. There's far too many young people suffering, can't get on with their lives, stuck in their parents' houses, stuck in poor accommodation, if they're even lucky enough to get that, or having to leave the country. And I don't think enough has been said about the young people having to emigrate, because people think, well, look, that's part of, normal life. Lots of young people love to go abroad and work for a while. Of course they do. We're not talking about that type of emigration. We're talking about people who feel they will never own a house in their own country. And I remember Brenda Power was on the radio a couple of weeks ago, and she has 5 children, and some of whom are living with her. And she said she can look forward to her children hopefully being able to rent in 2030, not buy. Just she's hoping, and they hope they'll be able to rent somewhere, that there'll be a little bit more housing available. Now, I just finished the point on this on this particular point, that the government has I don't know how it has managed to dodge all the questions, because anybody I talk to when I meet on the street or when I'm in the constituency office, everybody is exercised over this. And I just cannot understand how the government is, months and months and months are passing without any coherent plan in place. And there is no end in sight that young people will be able to move out of their parents' home. And I think that is really, really tragic. And I think another element of this whole story is elderly people not being able to rent when they get into their mid to late 60s. I think that is one of the scandals of this current government, as and most of them are from the last political term as well. I mean, to think that elderly people are going into their latter years faced with insecure housing. I just can't imagine the worry, the stress, the financial pressures that goes with that. I mean, young people have a little bit more scope to achieve things in life, even though everything is on hold, as I said earlier. But for the elderly to be faced with this incredibly depressing vista, it's shameful. It is utterly shameful.
A couple of weeks ago, we were speaking to the CEO of Alone, Sean Monaghan, and he was saying that the amount of older people living in poverty and living in homelessness. Now, I came out of that interview and video just feeling absolutely deflated that there's older people who have served this country well, paid taxes, and helped build this country, that are now living in poverty and in homelessness.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very sad. And we always say you judge a country by how it treats its vulnerable. And I dread to think how really we can be judged, because you've heard the numbers of children living in poverty. It's astronomical. The government loves to publish our tax receipts and how over beyond expectations we are for the last number of years, even though another agency did publish there a couple of weeks ago that we are running a deficit every year were it not for the corporate tax. And that is very, very fragile. You never know when that is going to dry up. So people like saying that we're a very wealthy country, but the wealth of a country, in my view, can only be judged if you look at public services provision. And public service provision in this country are not great. So I am beginning to question how wealthy this country really is, because the number of young people leaving, the number of older people contacting all the various charities for help, the squeezed middle that can just about get to the next paycheck to keep going. And then we have a huge swathe of the population on social welfare. And, these are not the signs of a functioning society and economy. So there's something not adding up there. So the tax returns seem to be high, but why on earth this government is not to get more bang for our buck, I just don't know.
My daughter's a doctor, and she keeps saying that she cannot afford to buy her house, and she's a doctor. Supposed to be doctors, engineers, solicitors, all supposed to be up there in the high income bracket. And she said that she doesn't see herself ever owning a house. And I'm talking to an awful lot of doctors. She's just returned back from Melbourne. Thank God she came home. And but an awful lot of doctors are saying they're not coming home because the cost of living crisis. And with all the money that they're saving in Australia, that the Australian dollars are not what they're devalued when they exchange them into euros, and the cost of living crisis, and they want to come home, but the paying conditions of the health service and the cost of living and the cost of living crisis is we are exporting all our highly educated young adults, and we're not replacing those highly educated children back into our country. And we really need to we were talking to a county council, an independent county councillor last year, and he said we should be asking our doctors and our nurses and all our plumbers and tradespeople, what would it take to bring you back? And if they can put up all these iPass centres and turn them into accommodation, how come they couldn't turn them into accommodation to bring everybody back as a temporary accommodation, turn them into apartments to bring them all back so they have somewhere to stay and work?
Absolutely. And Aontú launched Operation Shamrock there about 2 weeks ago with that very aim in mind to bring back those people who wish to come back and set up their lives back in their hometown or village or city. And, the government showed not a blind bit of interest in that project. And we have, detail. It's a very detailed document, and we show how we can pay for it, how we can work it within a certain timeline, and communicate the message to all the Irish that have gone to Canada and the States and to Australia. And honestly, the government has no focus on doing that. Everything is about if there's a will, there's a way, and there's no doubt the government is primarily focused on what the EU wants Ireland to do, as opposed to what Ireland wants to do for itself. And that adds, a whole another layer of utter disappointment and frustration that many people in Ireland feel towards the government, in that it just doesn't seem to prioritise Irish people. And that would be an issue of my own. Like, Aontú is a pro-EU party, but I definitely feel that we have ceded far too much of our sovereignty. My interest in the EU is the common market and freedom of travel and all that goes with that. But the idea now that up to nearly 78% of our legislation comes from the EU is not serving the people of Ireland. And it just seems to have totally distracted our leaders. They're not focusing enough on what's going on here. This what I'm talking about now, it's all over social media. And I don't go as far as what many other commentators might say, but I do feel that we need to bring back far, far more the decision making about Ireland to Ireland. And I just wish to God we had some leadership that was capable of demanding that, because I have no confidence that the current batches of ministers and leaders are going to change route. It seems that they are so far gone down this route that they're not returning, but it's having a very, very negative impact on our country. But look, we would have had submitted many PQs, Roisin, about the number of visas issued to medical graduates in this country and the numbers that have gone to Australia, and it is through the roof. And this has been felt in towns and cities all over Ireland, but there's just not enough GPs at all. Meath particularly has the lowest number of GPs per capita in the country. So, there's so many glaring shortfalls and they're not being dealt with. And, the fact that people cannot get an appointment with their GP for 3 weeks is utterly ridiculous in a country that has the tax returns that it has. So again, it's all about, if you don't measure all the failings and the shortfalls, then you can't plan to address all those issues. And I just don't feel the government is connected anymore. They really are not connected to the people. And there was an interview, I'm sure you heard about Simon Harris over the weekend, and he is a prime example of a minister that is not connected to the people, or not aware of the trials and tribulations of having to live on a salary, rear children, send them to college, deal with the massive spike in food prices. They are just not aware. And if you're not aware, how can you possibly do a good job and addressing all the problems associated with them?
And with the cost of living crisis, and even going down to the supermarket, everyone's talking about when they go to the supermarket checkout, what that costs what? It's people are not living anymore. They're just living from paycheck to paycheck, and that's across the spectrum on all the social and economical backgrounds. You were also very active in the no referendum. Aontú was very active, and you are were very active in the referendum, especially taking the word mother and woman out of the referendum, and then the disabilities bill.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, even prior to the referenda, I had submitted a motion to Meath County Council. This was at the time when we were transposing legislation from the EU, and it was the maternities bill, and they were trying to remove the word mother, female, motherhood, and just replace it with gender neutral language.
Right.
And there was a huge outcry. It was all aired on Joe Duffy and pretty much pushed by Roderick O'Gorman at the time. But due to the outcry from the public, it was reversed. Okay, so all those words were retained within the legislation. But when I was putting through my motion, because of delays, some agendas are longer than others, so we didn't get to my motion. So I resent the motion, said that for all future legislation pertaining to women or motherhood or whatever, that we ensure that these words are always retained. So because my first motion fell because it was no longer applicable. So when I spoke to my motion at Meath County Council, the government councillors couldn't support it. And they said, no, let's refer to the Women's Caucus to have a discussion about whether these words, which relate to women, should be retained in future legislation related to women. So I was pretty shocked at the time, Roisin, that a good number of the female government councillors could not support my motion. So they were willing to shoot down my motion, even though they were women. And they're women my age, and they have daughters, and they have sisters, and they have aunts, but they were willing to toe the party line on this motion. So then I had to go around the houses. I had to go to the protocols committee, then back to the caucus. So about 7 months later, I was eventually able to resubmit it onto the Meath County Council, and I got it over the line, just barely. And it was just a tiny thing where we write to the minister that and you know, these motions, you know, letters are sent all the time to ministers, and they're not radical in that they don't change a huge amount, but I just felt this was so important that I needed to get it documented and recorded, you know. So it was this a tiny little win. So when the two referenda came up, I was pretty shocked because I'm out in the public the whole time. I talk to hundreds of people every week. I never heard anybody look for those two referenda. Nobody I met or spoke to, and I speak to other political parties. So we could not understand what was driving those two referenda, because most people are going, what does this even mean? What are these durable relationships? What does any of this mean? So there was huge consternation. And I think the fact that people were going, what is this all about? Do we really need this? Is this going to, like, you know, what will this mean maybe in future? Is this something that could lead to something else that would be outside of our control? So it was the lack of genuine open discussion about it that I think put people off. And then obviously, you know, people just could not understand how the government would want to remove the word mother from the Constitution, because it doesn't feature enough as it is.
We were up at the Fine Gael Ardèche, and we spoke to Charlie Flanagan, and I thanked him for, you know, standing up for women's rights and speaking out against the referendum. And he said, Roisin, they brought that to me years ago, about 10 years ago, and I said that I couldn't stand by it. The word, you know, there's no way it was going to pass, and he couldn't find the right words. But it goes to show you how detached that the government are from the ordinary people on the street when they and how do you think it was a program for government? But when you have a small minority party that has so much control over the government.
I know. It was disproportionate to its size. There's no doubt about it. But I suppose at the time there was a huge element of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael wanting it to work, that they were willing to cede to the demands of the smaller party in order to be in power. Because there's no other explanation as to why they were willing to do it. And there's no doubt the Green Party had very far-reaching influence that was not in keeping with the number of elected reps they had at the time, you know. But you know, I suppose even though I'm a councillor only 6 years, I've been politically active for 30 years, okay? Not so much to the forefront, more in the background. So I nothing really surprises me in terms of what politicians are willing to do when they're in a certain situation. And even this might sound somewhat unusual, but there's a huge cohort of the 100 and what now, the 68 or 172 TDs. There's a huge cohort of them pro-life. You know, they are not happy with the abortion laws that are in this country, but they are not going to put their head over the parapet. And because I know that, it makes me question how many other things they disagree with, but are happy to go along with. And if you have a Dáil chamber populated with people who are motivated to completely subjugate their core principles for promotion or for the stability of their party, things cannot work out for the people or the electorate. You cannot have fair or proper governance. So where we are today really is no surprise, because we don't have enough honourable, genuinely principled TDs in Leinster House. And you know, I'm not referring to people that I disagree with who think differently about things, because I know those people they do believe in what they believe in. And even though I disagree with them, I know how would I say it, that they're genuine in their beliefs. But it's the people I know who are going against their belief purely for the wrong reason. They're the worst type of leadership to have, because it creates it creates what we have today, in that a government that lives in a bubble and is not really empathetic to all the struggles that people have. And it wasn't until I became a councillor that I realised how many people suffer in this country. Because, you know, I suppose I lived in Dublin, you know, it was a somewhat different world that I inhabited. But when I came back to Navan, and then I'm meeting thousands of people every year that, you know, as I said to you earlier, they didn't get the same opportunities. Everything is so much harder for them. And the government has no interest in helping them, because these people might not vote ever. And they're completely disenfranchised and marginalised. And, you know, there is this association that, you know, the Fianna Fáil tent and Fine Gael, you know, dealing with farmers and business people, they do not care for those people that will not reciprocate in kind to them. And as a result, so many people are left behind.
You were also and you are still a very strong sort of activist against the gender ideology. And you have a massive sporting background within your local GAA, in your hockey and your tennis, and as a coach. And also about with the hospital as well, you mentioned about the toilets in the hospital. The gender ideology was another Green Party push. And the gender ideology has really divided the country, and especially the NGOs have been pushing the gender ideology. And then you have to question, with all this diversity inclusion, who are they excluding? Is the very hard women that women fought for human rights and women's rights and children's rights, and women are being excluded by all this inclusion and diversity.
I know it's a big contradiction in truth, because you can't include everybody. It's just not possible.
No.
Somebody is excluded, and you know, I suppose when this whole movement started or was brought to Ireland, I didn't give it huge thought, because I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. I thought that the pronouns, you know, the language and narrative, I thought, how is this going to gain traction? It just didn't feel to me that it would, as I say, gain ground. So initially I didn't pay too much attention. But then obviously reading what was going on abroad in terms of, you know, men who identify as women were partaking in sports and you know, winning medals, and you know, obviously what went on in the Olympics with regard to the boxing category, and that poor lady I mean, I was utterly utterly shocked and, nearly incredulous, thinking this cannot be happening. Adult people that run these organizations in the Olympic Council, I just thought there is no way they would do anything that would jeopardize participation by females in the female category. So to an extent, it took me a while to realize this was serious. This was actually happening, and it was getting more and more embedded across society. And now here we are in July 2025, and I see every arm of the state in Ireland now has bought into this. And within a few small years, it has gone from something that we thought mightn't really gain traction to now it being almost hard and fast rules and regulations within every arm of society. And to think that the LGFA, which is the Ladies Gaelic Football Association, endorsed this policy in February 2023, and it did so without telling any of us. Yeah. And when I heard that it had passed through, a small number of delegates had voted for it overwhelmingly, I just thought that's strange. Anybody I talk to doesn't agree with it. How could it be a unanimous, well, not unanimous, almost unanimous vote? I said, that just doesn't add up, because, I had talked to hundreds of people that I rang, club chairs, coaches, mentors, parents, and my children and all their friends. And I said, guys, I want you to survey your peers and just give me the general overview. And nobody would want nobody I spoke to was for it, okay? And nobody could understand that from the age of 12, when boys and girls are kind of separated because, the differences in skill level and strength level begin to kick in. And I have twins that are boy-girl, and they played together for years and enjoyed it. But then obviously when they got to a certain age, they were separated for their own safety. And even though I remember at the time my daughter was quite disappointed, she said, "Ma, I'm still well able to take on the boys." I said, "I know you are, Isabel. You're very tall and strong and all the rest. But, there's other girls that wouldn't be. And sporting organisations have to make decisions for the overall good." And now, as I say, a few years later, sporting organisations in Ireland are not making decisions for the overall good. And for me, Roisin, the biggest problem about all of this is, if we can upend the most clearest, scientific and biological fact that we all grew up and learned and understood, there's nothing that can't be upended to suit a political narrative or a WHO narrative or a UN narrative or an EU narrative. It means that anybody who wants to say that black is white can actually get away with it now. And that is what has fired me up against this policy getting more and more embedded here. Because there's no lie that can't be presented as truth if this becomes law across this island. So I could talk about the subject matter for hours, because there's so much to it. If you can have adults say that, a boy at the age of 12 that identifies as a girl has more of a right to play with or against or access changing rooms than the girl who is playing, well then, that is a great lie. His rights do not trump the girl's rights. And it's the same at adult level. And, it just worries me that if adults have managed to sell this lie, what is the next lie that could follow this?
Exactly. And also the fact that you had chest feeding.
Yes.
Men could breastfeed. I mean, how illogical is that men could chest feed, and then that would lead on to all the other issues of it's just gone out of my head, but all the other issues of transgender ideology, that men have more rights, as you mentioned, as women, and that if anybody complained, that they were ghosted, they were cancelled, and even lost their jobs. And that is absolutely, like, where has common sense gone in Irish politics and Irish society? And that's what brings me on. I was going to say, is the educational system. We've all seen the books, the indoctrination of children.
Completely. Now, it hasn't happened overnight. We had it in the libraries there a few years ago, where books that were in the children's section were completely inappropriate to children. And so they dealt with gay matters and transgender matters, completely inappropriate for that age group. But yet that entire debacle was presented as far right, attacking librarians all across the country. That whole issue was presented in the most negative light. And I can tell you, the vast majority of people that I worked with on this sent in emails to the chief executive of their local council and the head librarian of the library in question. And meetings were taking place, and formal routes in terms of respectful dialogue with government departments. Everything was done properly to try and get to an understanding as why the government was okaying that these books would go into the children's shelves in libraries across the country. And yet, if you look at any mainstream media treatment of that entire debacle, it presents it as these far-right crazies. And it was such a false represent. Now, there possibly, or even there was people who did act inappropriately in terms of trying to talk to librarians about it. But the vast majority, and I mean 95% of the people who were totally against those books being in children's shelves, did it the right way, the proper way. I myself had the Director of Services for Meath County Council in a meeting with the head librarian. We sat down, we chatted for an hour, myself and another councillor. We got absolutely nowhere.
Makes you wonder where is all the money coming from? Then they always say follow the money, and the follow the money was USA aid. The money was coming from there, and IG, and so following the money. So there has to be a purpose and intention why there is to erase women and children out of society. But also the fact too, the indoctrination of children. I know many parents, you talk about the libraries, I know many parents who said they didn't want their children in the CSP classes, and took their children out and of school. I know teachers who left Ireland, who graduated from university and left Ireland because they did not want to go into school and teach the book, the content that was in the school curriculum in the books. They left Ireland before they would do that. And then I know for a fact, because I was over in a gym not far from here, I've since left, where I was saying, God, one day I was looking out the window, where's all these school children? There were 200 or 300 of them, all coming over, the teachers walking around the athletics track in front of me. And then I was told, Roger Gorman is down at the school right beside me. And I went, well, that goes to show you all the teachers are not in favour of this green agenda, what comes from the Green Party, to push the indoctrination of even teenagers. I wonder what only parents of primary school are thinking.
Well, it's interesting you say that. This is somewhat related to Roisin. I remember I was canvassing last year for the local election, and I was speaking to 3 or 4 constituents over that entire campaign, and they were Green supporters. And I said to them, you do realise now that this and the other and this other issue is all coming from the Green Party. And they said, look, I don't care, because their Green is good on climate action. So they were willing to sacrifice one to have the other. And I said, every political party has a green wing to their organisation. And we don't need a party that is just focused on green issues, because it is something that every human being on this island needs to be activated by, and all the rest. And I said, every political party can easily do a good job on this. The Green Party is bringing in far more negative than positive. So, but anyway, I'm not sure I'd change their opinion. Some people who are Green Party supporters are so, they care less about political issues and just more about climate action. And they're willing, as I say, to do anything to ensure that climate action is priority number 1. But they didn't care when I mentioned the whole transgender ideology issue. They didn't care. Now, on 2 occasions, 2 of them were quite elderly. Their children would have been grown up, so they would have had no idea of what was going on in the school curriculum or any of that. But it is very worrying. This new programme, Bí Cnálta, that is has just been kind of endorsed for the new academic year in September. Huge number of people utterly exercised by it because they've added a new category of bullying called, anti-trans bullying. So that means that any child that has any opinion or comes from a family where they're taught that, the rights of girls and women trump those that identify as girls and women, any child that even dared to articulate that view in the schoolyard, not that it would come up hugely at primary school level, that they could be punished or sanctioned for trans bullying. So a lot of people believe that this whole category was introduced purely as a vehicle to bring in the whole subject of trans ideology into primary schools. And it is now part of the curriculum across every primary school in the country. Children from the age of 4 will be taught about this as if it's fact. And I fear for children enough as it is, because they have enough to deal with phones and social media and all that goes with that. And now we are teaching children that, a whole other level of confusion, and they won't know which way their head is because they have adults telling them something that really and truly they should not be telling them. This should be a conversation that children have with their parents, not with their teachers.
It's really definitely messing with their heads and the psychology, the mindset, and the whole. Even it's from my opinion is that it is actually planting the seeds to tell children to question, are they a boy or girl? So they're actually planting and influencing children to actually question issues about whether they're a boy or girl, and that brings on mental health issues.
And there's huge social contagion associated with trans ideology and transgenderism and all that. So it is something that adults should be doing far more to protect children against, as opposed to be pushing the subject matter. But I myself, Roisin, I was a fierce tomboy when I was young. I had a brother each side of me in the family, and my favorite cousins were boys, and I always, loved being outdoors and active and busy, and wasn't a girly girl, had very little, I wouldn't say very little interest. It just didn't amuse me as much as the other. And then I suppose when I left school and started college, it changed. But it never crossed my mind at all about, oh my God, is it unusual to be a tomboy? Is it unusual to be like this? I just enjoyed it, and it was great fun. And because there was no talk of transgenderism back in that day, so it didn't. But I just feel all of our education seems to be about giving children way too much information. And like that just adds this big swirling of too much information. And people seem to think that we're equipping our children to navigate the hurdles in life. We're not. We're and if whatever information you do give children, it should be based on science and fact and tangible things that make sense. And as you mentioned earlier, Roisin, the amount of adults we have in the room who lack common sense is really one of the most destructive elements within our government.
You also you've been a huge campaigner in your Navan Hospital and your Navan Rail Link to Dublin campaigns. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, look, I suppose we've only the one hospital in County Meath, and that's in Navan, because Navan's the county town. So obviously there is huge merit in doing everything not to allow the government to close down any aspect of that hospital, particularly because the population of Meath now is nearly 230,000.
Wow.
And the population has mushroomed probably in the last 15 to 18 years. So that the government would think it makes sense to close a hospital in one of the fastest growing populations in the country makes it was utterly reckless. and then telling that huge cohort of people, well, you can go to the hospital in Drogheda, or you can go to the one in Dublin, or maybe one in Cavan, where all those hospitals are already at full capacity. So again, I just see this as foolhardy in the extreme, reckless. People are so reassured to know they have a hospital, within a 10, 15 kilometre radius, that you don't have to sit on a trolley for 5 or 6 days. And I just don't know why the government thought they could get away with it, because they are literally putting people's lives at risk, expecting them to, as I say, sit in a waiting room in Drogheda A&E, which for years has been overwhelmed by the numbers coming in on a daily basis. And to say that Navan people now could start going to Drogheda for emergency care, it really just shows you the mindset of the people we have in charge in this country. So over the years, we have brought 10,000 people out on the streets. God, it could be 5 times now. And it is a huge job. Like, you have to plan and prepare and advertise and bring in as many of the civic groups. It's a huge undertaking. But thankfully, the people that, the public, it hasn't been a hard sell from the point of view that they all know that if we lost Navan A&E, we'd never get it back. And this government had, I think, 10 other A&Es around the country, which it shut down. But the Navan A&E, I think, is the last remaining one that was on that hit list to stay open. And they have a job at their hands trying to shut it, because we'll get back out in that street again and again and again, because otherwise people will die.
And the Navan rail link to Dublin, tell us about that.
Right. So this, as again, is a very, very important issue, because, as far back as 20 years ago, all the auctioneer brochures, selling houses in Navan, and people would come down from Dublin to buy houses in Navan. Even back then, with the price of houses in Dublin, going very, very high, people were drawn to Navan because they said, when this rail line is up and running, I'll be able to commute to work quite easily, and won't be stuck in traffic or stuck in a bus. A train is far more efficient and quicker. But I remember we looked at a house in a certain house estate in Navan 22 years ago, and I remember seeing about the rail line coming to Navan. It definitely was a major come hither for many people who were considering buying. And as I say, 20 years later, we're now at the stage where it's in the programme for government, and it's in the Greater Dublin Transport Strategy Plan. But we're talking about this train will not roll into Navan until 2036. So we're talking about 11 more years away. And what's incredibly frustrating about that, there are people in Meath that spend 4 hours in their car a day. Now, that's at the most extreme end. Other people could have a commute of 2.5 hours a day round trip. But there are people who spend 2 hours a day each way. And I don't need to spell out the absolute torment that is on a daily basis. Now, thankfully, some people can do a couple of days remotely working from home. I'd say that has helped people live with this torment, because honestly, when you think about the cost of driving up and down every day, wear and tear of the car, the tolls, the government is cleaning up from keeping everybody driving. But it is such a massive tax on the mental health of people having to do that every single day. So look, I suppose we have to be a little bit thankful that it has started in terms of the preferred route it's going to issue soon for the rail line. But as you may have heard Peadar mention numerous times, when the rail line was built back in the 1860s, it was built in 3 years with picks and shovels. Our planning process won't even conclude within 3 years. So it's a whole. Now, obviously, there's so many kind of Natura impact statements that have to, or research and inquiries have to be conducted. But I just feel the whole planning process in this country, as we all know, is designed to just go on for years and years and years, and it just allows the government to not make timely progress. And as a result, the people of Meath are suffering so much over it.
Well, it just goes on and on and on, the crisis that is happening. It seems to be like Ireland is in a constant crisis mode from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to bed, every day of the week and every month of the year. So, Eimear Tobin, County Councillor for Meath West, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and speak to the Irish Political Roundup today. I know Paul will be raging he's not here, but he's away on his day job today. But
No.
we really do appreciate you taking the time to come on with us today.
Thank you also, Roisin. And look, I have a very optimistic disposition, and I know I listed a litany of problems going on in this country. And the fantastic thing about all these problems that we have, they are solvable.
They are
It's
solvable.
all about getting the right people into government that have the will, that have the motivation and the stamina to stay true to their principles.
Thank you so much.
For Míle maith agaibh.